Hello, welcome to Storytime with Miss Morn. It's a bit weird, I'm at home and you're at home, but we could do a little chapter or two every night for however long this goes on for. I hope you've had a lovely day at school, at home school, and we've missed you all a lot at the villa, but here we go. We're going to start George's Marvellous Medicine because it's one of my favourites. Are you ready? I'm going shopping in the village, George's mother said to George on Saturday morning. So be a good boy and don't get up to mischief. This is a silly thing to say to a small boy at any time. It immediately made him wonder what sort of mischief he might get up to. And don't forget to give Grandma her medicine at 11 o'clock, the mother said. Then she went out, closing the back door behind her. Grandma, who was dozing in her chair by the window, opened one wicked little eye and said, "Now you heard your mother. George, don't forget my medicine." "No, Grandma," George said. "And just try to behave yourself for once in a while she's away." "Yes, Grandma," George said. George was bored to tears. He didn't have a brother or sister. His father was a farmer, and the farm they lived on was miles away from anywhere. So there were never any children to play with. He was tired of staring at pigs and hens and cows and sheep. He was especially tired of having to live in the same house as that grisly old grunion of a grandma. Looking after her all by himself was hardly the most exciting way to spend a Saturday morning. "You can make me a nice cup of tea for a start," Grandma said to George. "That'll keep you all out of mischief for a few minutes." "Yes, Grandma," George said. George couldn't help disliking Grandma. She was a selfish, grumpy old woman. She had pale brown teeth and a small, puckered-up mouth like a dog's bottom. "How much sugar in your tea today, Grandma?" George asked her. "1 spoon," she said, "and no milk." Most grandmothers are lovely, kind, helpful old ladies, but not this one. She spent all day and every day sitting in her chair by the window. And she was always complaining, grousing, grouching, grumbling, griping about something or other. Never once, even on her best days, had she smiled at George and said, "Well, how are you this morning, George?" Or, "Why don't you and I have a game of snakes and ladders?" Or, "How was school today?" She didn't seem to care about other people, only about herself. She was a miserable old woman. George went to the kitchen and made Grandma a cup of tea with a tea bag. He put 1 spoon of sugar in it and no milk. He stirred the sugar well and carried the cup into the living room. Grandma sipped the tea. "It's not sweet enough," she said. "Put more sugar in." George took the cup back to the kitchen and added another spoonful of sugar. He stirred it again and carried it carefully to Grandma. "Where's the saucer?" she said. "I won't have a cup without a saucer." George fetched her a saucer and what about a teaspoon, if you please?" "I've stirred it for you, Grandma. I stirred it well." "I'll stir my own tea, thank you very much," she said. "Fetch me a teaspoon." George fetched her a teaspoon. When George's mother or father were home, Grandma never ordered George about like this. It was only when she had him on her own that she began treating him badly. "You know what's the matter with you?" the old woman said, staring at George over the rim of a teacup with those bright, wicked eyes. "You're growing up too fast. Boys who grow up too fast become stupid and lazy." "But I can't help if I'm growing up fast, Grandma," George said. "Of course you can," she snapped. "Growing is a nasty, childish habit." "But we have to grow, Grandma. If we didn't grow, we'd never be grown-ups." "Rubbish, boy, rubbish," she said. "Look at me. Am I growing? Certainly not." "But you did once, Grandma." "Only very little," the old woman answered. I gave up growing when I was extremely small, along with all the other nasty childish habits, like laziness and disobedience and greed and sloppiness and untidiness and stupidity. You haven't given up any of these things, have you? I'm still only a little boy, Grandma. You're 8 years old, she snorted. That's old enough to know better. If you don't stop growing soon, it'll be too late. Too late for what, Grandma? That's ridiculous. You're nearly as tall as me already. George took a look at Grandma. She certainly was a very tiny person. Her legs were so short, she had to have a footstool to put her feet on, and her head only came halfway up to the back of the armchair. Daddy says it's fine for a man to be tall, George said. Don't listen to your daddy, Grandma said. Listen to me. But how do I stop myself growing? George asked her. Eat less chocolate, Grandma said. Does chocolate make you grow? It makes you grow the wrong way, she snapped. Up instead of down. Grandma sipped some tea, but never took her eyes from the little boy who stood before her. Never grow up, she said. Always grow down. Yes, Grandma. And stop eating chocolate. Eat cabbage instead. Cabbage? Oh, no, I don't like cabbage, George said. It's not what you like and what you don't like, Grandma snapped. It's what's good for you that counts. From now on, you must eat cabbage 3 times a day. Mountains of cabbage, and it's got caterpillars in it, so much better. Ugh, said George. Caterpillars give you brains, the old woman said. Mummy washes them down the sink, said George. Mummy is as stupid as you are, George said. Cabbage doesn't taste of anything without a few boiled caterpillars in it. Slugs too. Not slugs, George cried out. I couldn't eat slugs. Whenever I see a live slug on a piece of lettuce, I gobble it up quick before it crawls away. Delicious. She squeezed her lips together tight so that her mouth became a wrinkled hole. Delicious, she said again. Worms and slugs and beetly bugs. You don't know what's good for you. Oh, you're joking, Grandma. I never joke, she said. Beetles are perhaps best of all. They go crunch. Grandma, that's beastly. The old hag grinned, showing those pale brown teeth. Sometimes, if you're lucky, she said, you get a beetle inside the stem of a stick of celery. That's what I like. Grandma, how could you? You find all sorts of nice things on sticks of raw celery, the old woman went on. Sometimes it's earwigs. I don't want to hear about it, cried George. A big fat earwig is very tasty, Grandma said, licking her lips. But you've got to be very quick, my dear. When you put one of those in your mouth, it has a pair of sharp nippers on its back end, and if it grabs your tongue with those, it never lets go. So you've got to bite the earwig first, chop, chop, before it bites you. George started edging towards the door. He wanted to get far away as possible from his filthy old woman. You're trying to get away from me, aren't you? She said, pointing a finger straight at George's face. You're trying to get away from Grandma. Little George stood by the door, staring at the old hag in the chair. She stared back at him. Could it be, George wondered, that she was a witch? He had always thought witches were only fairy tales, but now he wasn't so sure. Come closer to me, little boy, she said, beckoning him with her horny finger. Come closer to me and I'll tell you secrets. George didn't move. Grandma didn't move either. I know many secrets, she said, and suddenly she smiled. It was a thin, icy smile, the kind a snake might make just before it bites you. Come over here to Grandma and she'll whisper secrets to you. George took a step backwards, edging closer towards the door. "You mustn't be frightened of your old grandma," she said, smiling that icy smile. George took another step backwards. "Some of us," she said, and all at once she was leaning forwards in her chair and whispering in a throaty sort of voice George had never heard her use before. "Some of us," she said, "have magic powers that can twist the creatures of this earth into wondrous shapes." A tingle of electricity flashed down the length of George's spine. He began to feel frightened. "Some of us," the old woman went on, "have fire on our tongues and sparks in our bellies and wizardry on the tips of our fingers. Some of us know secrets that would make your hair stand straight up on end and your eyes pop out of their sockets." George wanted to run away, but his feet seemed stuck on the floor. "We know how to make your nails drop off and teeth grow out of your fingers instead." George began to tremble. It was her face that frightened him most of all. The frosty smile, the brilliant, unblinking eyes. "We know how to make you wake up in the morning with a long tail coming out from behind you." "Grandma," he cried out, "stop! We know secrets, my dear, about dark places where dark things live and squirm and slither all over each other." George made a dive for the door. "It doesn't matter how far you run," he heard her saying. "You won't ever get away." George ran into the kitchen, slamming the door behind him. There we go. And that is the end of that chapter. I will see you tomorrow. Have a lovely sleep and enjoy your learning tomorrow. Bye.